Jason Porter trusted his wife Emily with everything: his heart, his home, and even the love they had built over years of military service and motherhood. But when he returned from a year-long deployment, he uncovered a web of betrayal so shocking it would tear their world apart. Emily, once the devoted wife, had secretly recorded over 100 affairs, each one a devastating blow to the man she vowed to love and honor. What started as a quiet homecoming turned into a nightmare of lies, revenge, and a marriage shattered beyond repair. When Sergeant Jason Porter left for his deployment overseas, it seemed like just another routine rotation in the life of a military family. Jason, a dedicated Army man, had always been committed to his country, but his heart was at home with his wife Emily and their young daughter Lily. Their marriage had survived several deployments already, and Jason was confident that their bond was unbreakable. Emily was his rock, the person he could rely on through the long months of separation. Despite the distance, he believed their love could withstand anything. Back home in their suburban neighborhood, Emily took on the role of the dutiful wife and mother. She posted cheerful photos on social media of herself and Lily, always looking picture-perfect in their small, cozy home. There were no signs of trouble. Emily would write sweet letters to Jason, telling him how much she missed him and how Lily was growing so quickly. It was as if everything was normal, just like it had been before he left. Jason clung to these small moments of connection, finding comfort in Emily's reassuring words. They had a routine, as best as they could manage under the circumstances. But life for Emily was not as smooth as the carefully curated version she presented to her husband. Without Jason around, Emily faced the challenges of raising their daughter on her own. The loneliness crept in. While she stayed busy with daily life, there were times when the weight of solitude became unbearable. It wasn't just the absence of Jason, but the feeling of being trapped in a routine that offered little excitement or intimacy. As time passed, Emily found herself yearning for something more. A small spark, a connection with someone, anything to break the monotony. It started innocently enough. A friendly conversation with a man at the gym. He was new to the area, and they exchanged a few laughs. Emily didn't think much of it at the time, but as the days went on, she found herself looking for reasons to see him again. One thing led to another, and before she knew it, a casual fling turned into something more. What was once an escape from the loneliness quickly became an addiction to the excitement, the thrill of doing something forbidden. But that wasn't the end of it. Emily's need for connection grew stronger, and soon she was finding new men to satisfy her desires. Some were from the local town, others came through online dating apps, and a few were men she met at social gatherings. It became a habit. Each encounter left her feeling temporarily fulfilled, but the emptiness soon returned, urging her to keep going. Emily knew she was betraying Jason, but the guilt never felt heavy enough to stop her. She rationalized her actions, telling herself that he was far away, doing his duty for his country. He wouldn't know. She wouldn't let him know. As the months passed, Emily became more reckless. The secret world she was building was something she couldn't let go of. Each affair, each new face, became part of the story she was creating for herself. She kept track of it all, documenting her encounters like a twisted diary. Photos, videos, and detailed notes of every meeting were carefully stored away on her phone. She convinced herself it wasn't hurting anyone. She told herself Jason would never find out, and even if he did, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, he was out there fighting in a foreign land, while she was just trying to feel alive again. Emily never imagined that the life she had carefully constructed, a life built on lies, would eventually unravel. But deep down, she knew that it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. As the months wore on, Emily's secret life began to consume her in ways she hadn't anticipated. What had started as a brief distraction from the long stretches of isolation soon grew into a tangled web of lies, each affair more daring than the last. At first, she had justified her actions to herself. Jason was gone, doing his duty in a distant land, and she was left to deal with the daily grind of motherhood without him. The loneliness gnawed at her, and she craved the attention and affection she no longer received from her husband. It was easier to give in to temptation than face the emptiness of her situation. She met men in a variety of places. Some were strangers, others were familiar faces in her daily life. Men she'd encountered in the neighborhood, at the gym, at local coffee shops. The first man was a flirtation, harmless in her mind. She never planned on anything serious, never intended for it to go any further than a few stolen moments of excitement. But the thrill of it was intoxicating. She found herself craving the attention, the rush of being desired. The next time, she didn't hesitate. A second affair followed soon after, then a third. Emily's guilt, once sharp and jagged, began to dull over time. Each man was a new experience, a new adventure that took her further from the life she shared with Jason. She was no longer thinking about the future or the consequences of her actions. Her world had become a series of fleeting moments, each one offering a temporary escape from the life she felt trapped in. But with every affair, the stakes grew higher. What had been secretive at first, something easily hidden, soon became more complicated. She began to keep a detailed record of her liaisons, a strange form of control, perhaps. She took photos of herself and her lovers, filmed videos during their encounters, and even wrote notes, sometimes analyzing the experience afterward, as if it were all some sort of twisted project. Emily told herself it was harmless. These were just physical acts, nothing more. She wasn't emotionally invested in any of these men, and she convinced herself that it didn't matter. Jason, after all, was so far away. He didn't know what was happening, and he likely never would. Her focus shifted from the guilt she once felt to the excitement that these encounters brought her. The thought of Jason, the man she once loved, became more distant and faded into the background. But what Emily didn't yet fully understand was how her actions were slowly chipping away at her sense of self. As she continued to add more names to the list of men she had been with, she began to lose touch with the woman she used to be. She had once been the devoted wife, the loving mother. But now she was someone entirely different, someone who had become addicted to the secrecy and the power of living a double life. The men in her life were disposable. Each one served a purpose, offering what Jason could not. Yet none of them truly mattered to her. They were temporary fixes to a much deeper issue, a wound that had been festering long before Jason's deployment. She knew she was heading down a dangerous path, but for some reason, she couldn't stop herself. She kept telling herself that it wasn't hurting anyone, that it wasn't real betrayal. But deep down, she knew she was living a lie. Emily's secret world grew more complex, more impossible to control. The thrill of it all began to lose its luster, but she couldn't stop. She could not bear the thought of returning to her life as it had been before, a life without excitement, without the attention and validation she craved. And so, she continued, building her hidden world even further, until it was too late to turn back. Jason's return home after his deployment was supposed to be a joyous occasion. He had spent the better part of a year in a foreign country, away from his family, missing the small moments of everyday life. As an army sergeant, he was no stranger to long stretches of separation, but this time was different. This time the distance felt more painful. He had grown accustomed to the sound of his daughter's voice over video calls, the sight of Emily smiling in photos, but now that he was finally coming home, he imagined it would all feel different. He expected that first embrace to be as comforting as it had always been. The sense of safety, the return to normalcy. But something was off. The moment Jason stepped through the door, he sensed it. Emily was distant, her usual warmth replaced by a coldness he couldn't place. There was no excited greeting, no rush to wrap her arms around him. Instead, she simply smiled faintly, her eyes avoiding his gaze as she led him inside. The awkwardness in the air was palpable. Jason tried to brush it off at first, chalking it up to the usual adjustment period after being apart for so long. He had been away for months, and Emily had managed life on her own. He figured it would take time to fall back into their routine. The first few days were uneventful, but the tension grew. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There were little things that didn't add up. Emily seemed distracted, lost in thought, as if her mind was elsewhere. The conversations they had felt strained, like the connection they once shared was fading. Jason wondered if it was just the stress of being home, or perhaps the weight of all the changes he had missed during his absence. But the more time he spent at home, the more his suspicions grew. Something wasn't right. Jason decided to take a look through the family computer one evening when Emily was in another room. He had no real reason to do so. No specific evidence or gut instinct telling him he should invade her privacy. But his curiosity got the best of him, and he started sifting through the files, looking for something, anything, that might explain the discomfort he was feeling. At first, he only found the usual family photos, emails, and some financial documents. But then, buried deep within the system, he found a hidden folder labeled Memories. His heart sank as he clicked on the folder. What he saw inside would change everything. There were dozens of images, some blurry, some clear, but all unmistakably revealing. Emily, his wife, was captured in intimate moments with other men. The pictures weren't just simple photos. They were detailed, often taken in her own home, and each one seemed more revealing than the last. He scrolled down further, each image a confirmation of his worst fear. There were videos too, each one more disturbing than the next. The men weren't strangers. Some were local, others familiar faces, all connected to Emily in ways that Jason never could have imagined. The shock of it all left Jason breathless. His mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing. He thought of the times Emily had sent him sweet messages and pictures of their daughter, telling him how much she missed him, how much they were looking forward to his return. The thought that she had been living this secret life while he was away felt like a betrayal he couldn't fathom. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had believed in, had shattered everything. Jason felt a sense of betrayal deeper than anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just the act of infidelity. It was the utter deceit, the lies woven into every conversation, every message, every promise she had made. As he continued scrolling through the images and videos, Jason's anger began to swell, but so did his sense of hopelessness. He didn't know what to do with this information. The life he had built, the trust he had placed in Emily, had been destroyed in an instant. He wasn't too sure what hurt more, the physical betrayal or the emotional distance that had been growing between them for months, maybe even longer. Jason closed the laptop slowly, his hands shaking as he tried to steady himself. He knew he couldn't confront Emily just yet. He needed time to process, to figure out his next move. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Jason spent the next few days in a haze, unable to shake the images and videos that plagued his mind. The hurt and betrayal gnawed at him, but a deeper, more sinister feeling was taking root. A need for revenge. He couldn't just let it go. His entire world had been turned upside down, and he felt an overwhelming desire to take control, to make Emily feel the same agony he was experiencing. He wasn't sure when it happened, but the love he once felt for her had morphed into something darker. The emotions coursing through him weren't just sadness or betrayal. They were raw anger, a searing need to make her understand the gravity of what she had done. Jason didn't confront Emily immediately. He had a plan, and he needed time to carry it out. He began by quietly gathering information. He started with the men in the photos and videos, using the details in Emily's phone to trace their identities. Some were easy to find, local men who lived in nearby towns or had mutual connections with Emily through social media. Others were more elusive, requiring some digging, but Jason was determined. He spent hours each day combing through Facebook profiles, LinkedIn pages, and even online dating sites where Emily had met some of her lovers. Each man was a piece of the puzzle, and Jason wasn't about to leave any of them out. Once he had identified the men, Jason carefully crafted messages to each one, detailing everything he had discovered. He didn't want to give away his own identity just yet. Instead, he played his cards strategically, sending anonymous messages to each of them, outlining the affair and how Emily had been unfaithful to her husband. He sent the messages one by one, making sure that each man understood the gravity of the situation. He wasn't just trying to hurt Emily. He was trying to humiliate her, to make her realize the magnitude of her actions. But Jason didn't stop there. He knew that the best way to cause real pain wasn't just through the men Emily had been with. It was through her friends and family. So he reached out to her closest confidants, telling them the truth about what Emily had been doing. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He sent screenshots of the photos, videos, and even the messages he had found. He wanted everyone to know what she had done, to see her for the woman she truly was. Jason knew that Emily would feel the sting of this betrayal the most when her own circle turned their backs on her. As the days went by, the fallout from Jason's actions started to unfold. Emily's friends began distancing themselves. Some confronted her. Others simply stopped responding to her. The humiliation was immediate and brutal. Jason, watching from a distance, felt a twisted sense of satisfaction as Emily's life crumbled before her eyes. But even as she struggled to maintain a sense of control, Jason knew that the ultimate moment was yet to come. He hadn't yet confronted her in person. He hadn't yet looked her in the eye and made her face the damage she had done. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of waiting and planning, Jason decided it was time. He called Emily to meet him in person. Under the pretense of having a discussion about their relationship, she agreed, unaware that he already knew everything. When she arrived at the meeting place, Jason remained calm, masking the storm of emotions inside him. He didn't raise his voice or demand answers. Instead, he showed her the evidence, piece by piece, making her relive the very moments she thought she had buried. Emily, now aware of everything Jason had discovered, couldn't hide from the truth anymore. But by then, it didn't matter. Jason had already taken back the power, and the weight of the betrayal had shifted forever. The confrontation with Emily was a turning point, but it wasn't the dramatic scene Jason had once envisioned. In fact, it was almost anticlimactic. Emily sat there, her face drained of color as Jason laid out the evidence in front of her. There were no angry outbursts, no fiery accusations, just a cold, painful silence between them. Jason watched her eyes as she slowly realized that every secret she had been trying to hide, every moment of infidelity she thought was buried, was now exposed for the world to see. Emily didn't deny it. She couldn't. The evidence was undeniable. Instead, she looked at him, her expression a mixture of shame and regret. But there was something else there too, a sense of resignation. She had already lost. The guilt that had once weighed so heavily on her now seemed too much for her to carry. But even in that moment, when she knew the marriage was over, she didn't offer a single apology. The coldness of her response left Jason feeling even more betrayed. This wasn't the woman he had loved. This was someone else entirely. Someone who had lost the ability to feel genuine remorse. Jason didn't wait for her to explain herself. He didn't need to hear her excuses. The truth was already too painful to process. He had already seen what he needed to see, and there was no going back. The betrayal ran too deep, and in that moment, Jason knew that their marriage was beyond repair. He had waited for this moment, and yet it was nothing like he had imagined. He had expected to feel vindicated, to feel like a sense of justice had been served. But all he felt now was an overwhelming emptiness. The anger that had fueled his revenge slowly drained from him, replaced by a cold realization. The person he thought he knew and loved no longer existed. In the days that followed, things between Jason and Emily moved quickly. Emily, now isolated and ostracized by her friends and family, became a shell of the woman she had been. She filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. But Jason knew that this wasn't about legal technicalities. It was about the complete destruction of trust, the irreversible fracture of their bond. Jason didn't fight the divorce. In fact, he signed the papers without hesitation. There was nothing left to fight for. He had already won. But in the most hollow way possible. Emily's world continued to unravel. The man she had once trusted and loved had taken away everything she had worked so hard to build. The humiliation of her infidelities becoming public knowledge was the final blow. The whispers and gossip that followed her everywhere she went were a constant reminder of the lies she had told. And yet, despite all the pain she had caused, Emily struggled to accept the consequences. Her life had fallen apart, but she couldn't seem to grasp the gravity of her actions. As for Jason, he left the house that had once been their home, the house that held memories of their daughter's first steps, their laughter at family dinners, their quiet moments together. Now, it felt like nothing more than a hollow shell. He didn't want to stay, not in a place that had once been filled with love, now tainted by betrayal. He found solace in a small apartment nearby, a quiet place where he could think, heal, and move on with his life. The aftermath of the divorce was not easy for Jason. The emotional toll was still heavy, even though he knew he had made the right decision. He couldn't shake the feeling of loss, not just for his marriage, but for the life he had imagined he would have with Emily. The trust that had once bound them together was shattered beyond repair, and no amount of time would fix it. As for Emily, she struggled to rebuild a life from the rubble of her choices. The friends she had once relied on were gone, and the few who remained kept their distance. The loneliness she had tried to escape with her affairs was now her constant companion. She had lost everything: her family, her reputation, and the trust of the people who had once supported her. In the end, both Jason and Emily were left with the painful realization that some wounds never fully heal. The scars of betrayal would remain with them, reminders of the love they once shared, and the destruction that followed. Neither of them would ever truly recover from the brutal lessons they had learned. Their paths had diverged forever, and they would continue on, forever marked by the choices they had made.